Hey, this is Clark. I'm just going to do a quick video. I almost started not to even do one this week, but I had a couple of thoughts, a little different. Saw some things that I had not seen before. Just want to talk about, and this is kind of on a thought process of personal relationships. Sometimes is even more important than ministry. And hopefully, by the time I get done with these two quick thoughts, you'll see what I'm talking about here. But first one, we'll talk about this is Second Timothy chapter 3. And in verse 14, this is Paul talking to Timothy, of course. He's writing to Timothy. This is one of the pastoral epistles. It's one of the men that basically Paul trained. Timothy took over the church, which was at Ephesus. And this was an established church. And Paul treats Timothy, and even in the writing to Timothy, it's a little different than what he writes to Titus. The next one we're going to talk about is Titus, but this one's about Timothy. In verse number 14, Paul's talking to him, and he says, "But continue thou in the things which you have learned, and you've been assured of, knowing of whom thou hast learned them." Now, I've read this, probably even memorized it at some point, looking into this, and never really thought about it from this standpoint. But the two words in this verse, and I want to read the verse again, you see if you can figure out which two words I'm talking about. It says, "But continue the things which you've learned and has been assured of, knowing of whom thou hast learned them." It's not learned them, it's not any of those, but the two words is of whom. Paul is referring to someone who has talked to Timothy. It said, "These things which you have learned and of whom you've learned them." The importance of giving to someone, educating someone, helping them to learn something. Paul is enforcing in Timothy of these people that you've learned these from. In other words, it's almost as if the character and the trustworthiness of these people that you've learned them from. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but Timothy learned a lot from Paul. But I really don't think that's who he's talking about here, and that's because of chapter 1, when he's referring to, he says in verse 5 of chapter 1, this is the same letter he's writing to him. He says, "When I call to remembrance the faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois, and in your mother Eunice, and I'm persuaded that it's in you too." Now, I'm kind of paraphrasing. I'm looking at my phone app here and the Bible that's on it. But Paul says, these people that you learn from, and in this instance, he's referring to his mother and his grandmother. Now, Paul, like I said, taught him a lot. He considered Timothy a son in the faith. But he said, remember of whom you've learned these. So Paul is telling Timothy, remember what you've learned in these people, the trustworthiness of these people that you learned them from. Remember this. And these relationships are so important. It doesn't have to be a son or a grandchild that you're giving this to. Every day we come in contact, more than likely, we come in contact with people, and you have an opportunity to say something to them, to give them some sort of encouragement or a lesson of some kind, or maybe just how you treat them. A lot of times even goes a lot further than what you have said to them. And I think that goes along with this as well. Now, granted, you may be someone who listens to this who remembers your childhood and there was nothing biblical or spiritual about that. Well, Paul kind of answers this as he goes further after verse 14 in chapter 3. He says, "And from a child you hast known the holy scriptures, which are able to make thee wise in salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus." So Paul says, remember from whom you learned them. And then he says, because what you learned from them was the holy scriptures and about Jesus Christ, the things that are able to bring salvation to your soul. This was the importance of who they were, of the whom that's talking to, that Paul's talking about when he's talking to Timothy, when he's writing these things. So the personal relationship here is so important, but also what you're teaching in that personal relationship. I've often heard it said that people won't remember what you said, but how you treat them. And no matter how you look at that, I think that's probably true. A lot of times how you treat people is going to mean so much further down the road. And I'm looking up the next one here, and this is 2 Corinthians. Now, this is something I had not seen before this week. And actually, it was a book I was reading that brought this out, and I honestly don't even remember which book it was. Honestly, I mention books a lot, but I'm the kind of person that really, it's rare for me to pick up a book and read it from beginning to end, straight through. And I go back and forth. I have 3 or 4 different books I'm reading. If I lay down at night, sometimes I read a page, sometimes I read a chapter. But sometime this week I was reading this. I had not seen it before. And it's in 2 Corinthians. Now here's Paul talking. Now just consider these words that he says here. He says, now I'll probably paraphrase again here. He says, furthermore, when I came to Troas, and this is Paul, he goes to the city of Troas, he says, to preach Christ's gospel. Now this, no doubt, is the most important thing we think of when we think of Paul. We think of how he preached, how he started so many churches, how he preached the gospel when he went into each city, and how that was such an important part of Paul's life. But I want you to see here, more important than this preaching is Paul's relationship with Titus. He says, when I came to Troas to preach Christ's gospel, and a door was opened unto me of the Lord. Now consider this. Paul says a door was opened of the Lord. And we say so often, if the door's open, go through it, and I get that. A lot of times I even live by that. But Paul is talking here, and he says, I went to Troas to preach, which we know is one of Paul's, it's his passion. He says, and the door was open. As a lot of preachers would say, well, if the door is open, you need to preach it and stand on the street, whatever the case may be. But I want you to see what Paul does. In the next verse, he said, the door was open, and I went there to preach. But in verse 13 it says, I had no rest in my spirit because I found not Titus my brother. He is so concerned about Titus. He said, I went there, the door was open, but when I realized that Titus was not there. Now, there's kind of a parenthetical passage here in 2 Corinthians, and you won't see Titus come up again until chapter 7. So there's more to it than just the relationship of Titus, but I think that's the major thing here that Paul's talking about. Titus was carrying a letter to the Corinthian church, which he's talking to them here. This is a letter he's writing to them. And Titus had already went to Corinth, and he's talking. So Paul's concerned. In some aspects, he may even be concerned because he thought the Corinthians did not like him or might have something bad to say about him. Maybe he thought that the church at Corinth was treating Titus bad. Maybe that's one of his concerns here. But as he goes off before this parenthetical passage here that he goes off into, he says, no, let me just reemphasize this. I had no rest in my spirit because I found not Titus my brother, but taking my leave of them, I went from thence into Macedonia. So Paul literally is there in Troas. He said, the door's open to me to preach the gospel. But I looked around and Titus was not there. So Paul was so concerned about Titus. When he sees that he's not there, he leaves the city, even though God opened a door to him to preach it there in that city. He's so concerned about Titus that he leaves the city to go look for him. Now, this is not an easy task when you consider the time period they're in. That he had to go miles away to get to Macedonia here at the time. And you get into a city and you just look for somebody. It is so strange and foreign to us in our thought process because, we just text our friends. The generation that my children are in, it's sad because if someone texts them and they feel like they cannot answer them within the next few minutes, they're afraid their friend will be upset. That is so foreign to this time period. I remember reading about Lewis Clark on one of their expeditions, and they were supposed to meet. I don't remember the specifics on it, but they were supposed to meet somewhere, and one of them was like 2 days late, and they considered this reasonably punctual because of the time period and the travel that contained. They just said, we'll meet such and such a place at this time, and they were 2 days late, and they considered it reasonably punctual. We cannot do for minutes without someone. And here's Paul. He just knows he's supposed to meet Titus. And he's so concerned for Titus that even though God opened the door, he said, I'm leaving. I want to go and I want to make sure Titus is okay. And then, as I've said, when he gets into chapter 7, and actually let's just look there real quick. When he gets to chapter 7, And he's talking, he says, when I come to Macedonia, our flesh had no rest, but we were troubled on every side. Nevertheless, God that comforteth those that are cast down comforted us by the coming of Titus. So he brings it up again. Several chapters later, said we were comforted by Titus. So things worked out well, obviously, for Titus. And he says, and not by his coming only, but by the consolation wherewith we are comforted in you, when he told us your earnest desire, your mourning, your fervent mind toward me, said I rejoiced the more. So he was comforted because he found out Titus was okay, but also because the news that Titus brought to Paul about the church at Corinth, which Paul is writing to, which is the letter we're reading. So he's telling them, I'm so glad that you guys are okay. And he tells them, because of the letter I had written you, if you want to see more, get into the text, because I'm not going to be real long with this video. But the main focus I want to bring out in this is the importance of personal relationships and having someone that you can talk to, that you can minister to and with, that you can go back and that one person that you can tell anything to. And I'm talking, in this case, this is obviously not his spouse. And that's the point I'm trying to get at, that we need a friend. Guys need a guy friend that you can just talk to on this kind of level. A lady needs a lady friend that they can talk to on this level. And it is so important. And it's in this instance, I believe it's okay to say, it was more important to Paul than the preaching of the gospel. Some people might not agree with that, but according to this text, Paul thought that. Paul said, even though God opened his door for me, I'm leaving. I want to make sure that Titus is okay. And he did. And I'm sure everything was still okay. God still worked everything out. But it just goes to show that having this close personal relationship is so important. And it's important for us sometimes to see that. And that when it's someone we care about, it may be more important for us to reach out to them in instances than even going to the church on Sunday morning. I'm for it. I'm not against it. I think we need more of it. But I understand that we can go to church day after day, Sunday after Sunday, look around, you see someone's not there, and we think about it, but we never even reach out to them. We never even say anything to them. And here Paul says, this door was open, but I'm leaving because I want to make sure he's okay. Kind of goes back into that Sermon on the Mount. I think I brought this out just in my last video, but when Jesus is talking, he says you get to the altar and you realize you're going to make your sacrifice, but you remember you have a problem with your brother. Get up. Don't worry about your sacrifices. Go and make it right with your brother. Well, here Paul is kind of along those same thoughts, only that he doesn't know that anything's wrong. He just knows he has not shown up. And so Paul is like, okay, I'm leaving. I'm going after Titus. I want to make sure he's okay. So if you've listened to this video so far, if there's someone on your mind that you haven't seen for a while, you're concerned about, you may not be able to get in the car and go to their house, or that may feel awkward, but at least send them a text. At least call them. Send them a letter if you're still into letters, which some people are, and that's great. Do something. Make sure they're okay. Your words of encouragement to them may be the only thing that keeps them from slipping off into oblivion, from just completely giving up. You never know the power of your friendship to someone. Make it happen. Do it today. And until next time.